I'm so excited because today I have my friend Komal Minhas, columnist, business strategist, investor, thought leader, friend here to speak to us all about high performance leadership, thought leadership, and navigating really high highs in business while also really low lows. Hi, how are you?
I am doing so well. I'm so happy to be here for us to dive into all of the things.
Yes, I think as businesses scale and lives become really complicated on top of that, that this is a subject matter I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but you have just so much experience on these topics that I'm so excited for this conversation. So, do you want to give our audience a little intro on yourself?
Certainly. So as you shared, I am a columnist for Fortune magazine. I write about leadership and business over there. And then I'm also a business strategist working with early stage startups and executives to help them really elevate both their cash flow, revenue, but also their public brand recognition. And just really helping folks who are already experts in their fields be known as the leaders that they want to be known as publicly. And then for me personally, am a interviewer, so I absolutely love diving deep with people on podcasts like this, on stages, and really just helping people examine their inner selves and use the stories of others to really like go deep and figure out what they want next, while also navigating very complex and important issues of the world today. And then I invest in women-led companies, and I'm a proud angel investor. So I wear many hats. I contain multitudes, as we say, and I really love the work that I get to do every day.
Amazing. I think something that my audience and my clients really value, and I really value, is being multidimensional and being more than one thing. I find myself and my clients, we get very annoyed and limited if we are tried to put into a box. And especially with thought leadership, that's a topic that I feel like everybody wants to get into, but they just have no idea how to get started. Or there's this like misconception of like, you have to have achieved all these things before you almost like allow yourself permission to have a voice. So when somebody comes to you and they want to get started, they want to, pitch themselves to companies. Maybe they do have corporate experience like I have and then started my company. But they just don't know where to get started or how to even position themselves. What kind of advice do you give them?
So we usually start with diving into what is it exactly that you want to bring out in the world. So what is a great question to start here is like, what breaks your heart? So Glennon Doyle asks this question and she says, because that's who you're most meant to serve in the world. What you're
Mm,
most jealous of is how you're meant to do it. So
uh,
when I come back to this question, it's really clarifying because we know the things that make our hearts hurt the most. We know the things that make us like be called forward towards our work. For me, it's the economic empowerment of women, and specifically women of color, really ensuring that this generation of women are really able to improve their financial independence, but also like be known in the world for their very sacred ambition. So when we know what breaks our heart, it allows us to start thinking of the solution space we can exist in. And when we think of that, who we're envious of, it enables us to think, oh yeah, like maybe I do want to write it in a book. Maybe I do want to start taking stages, speaking on panels, doing these specific things. But why we need first what breaks your heart is because it lets us know what area of your expertise we most want to highlight. Because from there, you can then develop your core brand ethos. We can go in and define your value statement. We can go in and figure out what is your core curriculum or keynotes going to be about. Because we have to develop products around who you are as a thought leader. But to do that, first we have to know the direction, the vision of it. So that's that step one. And then the next is sort of that curriculum development, figuring out how it is that you want to bring this message into the world, and then figuring out how we package that and productize that in a way that financially supports you. For a lot of my clients, they have their own businesses, they're already executives. So this is like a fun, nice to have on in terms of the financial aspect, or it becomes the ship they want to jump to as a consultancy or advisory, and then speaking and all of those things. So those would be some of the initial steps. That curriculum development is what I love to do in our thought leadership intensive program because it takes time. And it also like you can
mm,
develop multiple curriculums, multiple types of keynotes. And then that also becomes what you talk about publicly when you're pitching press and doing all these things, watching for the moments of what's happening in the world and figuring out how can I be a thought leader and commentator on this. So that would be the
yeah.
starting point is what breaks your heart and what are you most envious of? And then from there we can develop the rest of the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. And I think building that voice and taking the time to think about those ethos and what breaks your heart and basically like who do you want to serve through your voice is such a big key component of the brand you're building, right? Like it is truly like the centerpiece of your brand and your business. And I think a lot of the times people also have this misconception of like, well, if it's not directly generating me revenue, then like I'm not going to bother with it. And the way I see it is like building your brand at the same time of building your business and those offers that are profitable and cash generating is still really important because we don't want to get to a point where like we have this business it's generating cash and now we feel behind in this part of the area that we really like wish we would have started a long time ago, but we just felt like for some reason we didn't have the permission to use our voice yet. So I think building that suite of products alongside the brand and the thought leadership voice is something that even in the Limitless Mastermind with my clients, we like really prioritize and emphasize.
hmm And when you have that product suite, then it also allows you to switch. Like I have so many clients, we start in one focus area with their thought leadership when they're really well known in that space. For example, for me, it's resiliency, doing,
Mm,
national talk shows in Canada, all these different things. And then now heading back into women's economic empowerment and business strategy, that piece of it, because this hybrid of resiliency and business is something that we need more of, especially coming out of the pandemic. So you can evolve your thought leadership and then your product suite can just follow along with you because everything you develop along the way, it is this duality. Brand always fuels the product suite, always will fuel revenue, even though if in the short term it is a lot more thinking and strategizing work,
mhm.
you can still have both of those engines running simultaneously.
100%. So in 2018, when you had the opportunity to pitch Michelle Obama, and then later in October 2019, you actually interviewed her, which not a lot of people have had that opportunity. You cold pitched her at
I
a
did.
book tour event, which wow. What have you did you already go through this process yourself in developing these ethos and developing all these different points by the time you pitched her? Or, and then what was the actual pitch itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that this ethos has been with me since I was so young. I'm a child of immigrants. I am the first woman in my lineage to have financial independence. And so I
Mhm.
know
Same.
like it's yes. So, it's like our lived
Mhm.
experience. Like this is
Yep.
why we do what we do because we know the impacts of both financial literacy and also like unbridled ambition that is so deeply appreciated in the world. And that we let ourselves unleash in the world. And so, did I have the brand ethos organized at that point? I had a version of it because now this
Mm.
is 5 years ago, which is so surreal to say. There's been a whole pandemic in between now and then, but
Right?
that event on stage in 2019, I pitched her in 2018 December, and then 2019 October is when we took the stage together. And then a few months later, we were all in lockdown. So it fueled me for the
Yeah.
last many years, for sure, being in a stadium with 8,000 people. But no, so my brand ethos was evolved. At that point, I knew that I was doubling down on my podcast lessons learned. And I knew that I was doubling down as an interviewer. I had just closed down my previous startup and had decided that this was what I was going to go all in on because it was what I was most deeply passionate about. And
Mm.
within like the 3 months of making that decision is when I landed the Michelle Obama interview. And that's when I knew I'm on the right track. So when I pitched her, um, I had bought tickets to her Colorado speaking tour or book tour event because I had just come out of a surgery actually, and it was a complicated recovery. So what should have taken 6 to 8 weeks, no, 4 to 6 weeks, ended up taking 8 to 10 weeks for me. So I was like down and out. I was like, again, like I've been through so many health challenges. A couple years prior, had survived cancer, a neurological illness, and now this endometriosis surgery. And I was like, okay, how do I like feel alive again? And a friend messaged me and said, do you want to go and check out, like, go to Michelle Obama's book tour? And then we found out Colorado were the cheapest tickets for the meet and greet. And I was like, we got to meet her if we're there. And then once we landed in Colorado, they had just announced, literally as we landed, they released the press release that they were going to take the tour to Canada and that they were going to Edmonton, Alberta, which is my home province of Alberta. And I thought, who's going to interview her there? Like, it has to be me. And so began me developing my 30-second pitch. And in that, I have this breakdown of the exact pitch that I teach in some of my programs. And the overarching piece of it is to really connect with someone's heart, or like something that really matters to a person right off the hook, to then provide credibility in the pitch. So like, what is something that they can relate to? So the hook is like, or the credibility for me was that I had been on Oprah's Super Soul 100 list. We'd premiered our film under the Obama White House. She wasn't there, but under the Obama administration. So it's like, okay, no, like, trust factors. And then bringing in like the heart punch, which was, I am a cancer survivor. I am deeply passionate about interviewing. It's something I care so much about. And I still have this note in my phone. I have the original that I had prepped for that pitch in my phone. And then I said, I know that interviewing is something that I meant to do in a major way in my life. And I am from Alberta, born and raised. And I think it's me who's supposed to interview you in Alberta. And she like grabbed my hands. We were holding hands and she's like, this is destiny. We were talking about this last night. Here's my chief of staff, Melissa. You can chat with Melissa. And if you know infrastructures around peoples of this scale, like if you're
Yeah.
introduced to the chief of staff directly by the person, it's a big deal. And so I knew that Melissa would then be, care about my emails. It wouldn't just go into the abyss. And so began the back and forth with Melissa to figure this out. And initially it was going to be in Edmonton. I think it was in March. And they ended up going with Robin Roberts for that, who's the host of Good Morning America. I can't even be mad because Mrs. Obama wanted someone that she was more familiar with at that point. And then in October or in September, it came up that she was going to be in Ottawa. And so I got back to work to figure out, how do I make this happen? And then 4 days before the event, I got the call that I was going to be the interviewer. And it was like a life-changing day. But the pitch is like critical. Any pitch that we do, it has to be well-researched, well thought out, compelling, and have a call to action in it that's really resonant and succinct. And so in that 20 seconds, 30 seconds, I was able to make that kind of an impact. Also, who does this? Who pitches someone at their book event of that scale and nature? So like, I'm so grateful she took me seriously.
Yeah, you had said that the hardest part of, interviewing Michelle Obama was just getting them to say yes. It was getting the permission to actually take that seat. And
Mhm.
so I think a lot of people automatically just discredit themselves and be like, well, I'm not even going to picture, because who pictures Michelle Obama, right? Like, who is going to give me like a name tag on that seat, right?
Yes.
But you had also stated, like, I am worthy to create wealth by being me. I am worthy
Mhm.
to have what I want by being me. So kind of like, what was your mindset, or kind of like what was that work that you had to do within yourself to even have the like mentality of like, this is my seat. I am worthy of the seat. Like, this seat belongs to me, because I feel like that is such a abundant mindset that like a 0.5% of business owners in general, the population has.
I appreciate that question so much. And I think that I had this like very interesting upbringing where I lived in a household with two families in it. So my mom and my dad raised my brother and I in the same household as my aunt and my uncle and their three children. And so my cousins were like siblings. My aunt and uncle were like a second set of parents. But my uncle was exceptionally abusive and a monster of sorts. And so I grew up with a very loving, immediate family unit and a mom who just always made me believe anything was possible. But then it was within this bigger context of often being cut down for my ambition and for being myself, which
Mm.
I knew at a young age that I was meant to do big things, that I was always going to be called to bigger things. And I did in my small community, which then led me to a bigger community and a bigger community and all of these opportunities. And so part of it came from like literally my mom's belief in me that there was something more and something bigger for me at every step of the way, at every turn, and internalizing that, but also like not quieting the inner voice in me that has always been called to the world stage. And
It's
so
just a knowing.
it's a knowing. And it's
Yeah.
always been like, I keep this wall behind me of like, I always turn off my self view. So you might want to edit just while I'm doing this. Like behind me, I've got like, this is when I was on the Super Soul 100. This was
Yeah.
when I would have seen Mrs. Obama in Edmonton. Over here, like you can't see it, but is the interview and interviewing Canada's First Lady, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, like with Meghan Markle, with, President Biden. It like the reason I surround myself with this is because proximity to possibility is so important when we're thinking of the
Mm,
larger goals we're trying to bring forward. So every time we're thinking of the next level we want to get to, we have to think who already exists in that realm and how do I surround myself more with that? It could be as simple as listening to the podcasts of the person. In the case of Mrs. Obama, it was reading Becoming and getting to know things about her life that then fueled my pitch and conversation with her, being able to talk to her about her grief, being able to make that resonant connection of having gone through difficulty that she also saw her loved ones go through and surviving it. So it's this proximity to possibility, holding on to hope in a really dark place. Like growing up in my household, my mom's belief in me and then therefore my belief in myself was my survival mechanism. And so it's one of the strongest things that was enforced in me because of how abusive our household was at the time and how chaotic it was. And so I've held on to that and I've been able to let that be a positive for me. It also has made me burn out often because I go
mhm.
hard and I go
Yep.
big, but being able to temper that and heal some of that and then actively choose my ambition instead of having it be something chosen for me because of trauma has been a huge aspect of this. But for someone who's feeling like they never swing for themselves, or like it's very hard to do that, you have to become your own hype human. My mom always says,
Yeah.
like, you have to be your own cheerleader. No one's going to buy you flowers. You have to buy them for yourself. And sometimes I'm like, no, like people will buy, like Mitch will buy me flowers when I occasionally need them.
I'm married. My husband will buy me
Yes.
flowers.
But in my mom's case, like my dad's also an immigrant. He started recently because we really encourage him to. But otherwise my
Yeah.
mom would just do it for herself and not
Yep.
worry about needing someone else to do it. So you can be your own reassurance and support system. Like when I'm writing these pitches in my phone or when I'm making these dream boards for myself and putting them together, half the time most people who would look at that would be like, you're fucking crazy. And I'm like, I am, but also
Yeah.
get my track record because I swing and I
Yeah.
try and I put myself out there and I'm also then the world starts to see you in that light as well. And
Yeah.
that's what we have to be really intentional about is where are we putting ourselves and how do we enable not just ourselves to believe it, but the people around us to see it.
Yeah, I truly believe like you have to believe it first before somebody can believe it for you.
Mhm.
I feel like we have such similar life journeys in the sense of we're both immigrants. We both have had tumultuous childhoods. But in my case, I grew up in a household that had a lot of generational trauma from not only my own experience with immigration and then having to assimilate into a culture that wasn't mine, but I mean, my generational trauma has war, has substance abuse, has physical abuse, has emotional, verbal abuse. So, like, I know that that's not my experience, but it is my experience just through my lineage, right?
Mhm.
So, all of that clearly then transpired into just my immediate household. But I think because of all of that my parents had been through, and then after we immigrated, like this sense of you can do anything you want to just wasn't really installed or even thought to be possible, because in their case I feel like they thought, well, we've just been through enough that this is good enough. this is
Mm.
this is like we're under the radar, we're good, we don't need to do anything more. So then when I had my knowing, even as a child, of like, no, I'm meant to do more. I know I have no examples. I know I'm stuck in this small town in Florida on this cul-de-sac, but like there's just like a knowing in me that even though I have no proof, no proximity to anything, that I'm still able to do more. And that really infuriated people close near me, specifically my
Mhm.
parents, because they were like, who do you think you are? Like, who do you think you are that you can take the seat from other people who are more, X, Y, and Z? So to me, like I had to be my own hype person. I had to be like, nope, I'm going to school in New York. I know you think it's going to be a giant failure, but I'm taking a risk on myself. And I feel like from that moment on, from age 17 to now 31, that has been what's carried me. And have I met people along the way like you who have been super supportive and have also been proximity to success? Absolutely. But it started because I believed in it first and I chose to make that a reality. And then the success followed. But I think a
Mhm.
lot of people first wait for the proof before taking any sort of action, or before they're like, no, this is my seat, even before they have any experience. So I think that's just it's so interesting to way to look for at two different people and where their sense of like self was developed.
Mhm. And they say like instead of waiting to see it to believe it, you have to believe it to see it.
Yeah.
And that's so much of like these notes. Like I cannot tell you, like there's so many of like in my phone when there's I'm on the line. Like I was in Italy at the Indian embassy in Rome, like two of the most interesting, overly bureaucratic country, like sort of infrastructures, trying to get a visa to go to India while I was like, it was for this event opportunity to work with Coca-Cola in India. And so like, but I have a note where I just repeat it over and over again. I'm walking out of here with my visa in hand. I'm like literally written, typed 100 times. And then I got in with the consular and he was talking to me or talking to someone on the phone and was like, yeah, in Hindi, he's like, I'm just messing with this young girl. I'll see you at the golf course later. And then I talked back to him in Punjabi, which is he would be able to understand. And I was like, I know exactly what you said. His jaw dropped and then he issued me the visa. And I'm like, why is that the situation? But at the same time, like you have to believe so deeply in yourself and be willing to like hear no. And in situations where consent is not necessary, but hear no, and then still keep pushing for your ambition and for what it is that's on your mind, because there's most often, especially when it comes to career progression or these opportunities, there's always a yes or a yes and. So when Edmonton was happening for Mrs. Obama's book tour, it was, okay, I'm not the interviewer, but I know that you highlight local people at the beginning of the show. So would it be possible to take the stage and be one of the people who shares her story? And I did. And so that was my opportunity to stand in front of a stadium of that many tens of thousands, like however many thousand people, and be able to see that room and then visualize, okay, when the opportunity came up in October to do it, I was like, I felt myself in the stadium. I felt myself on that stage. So it's incremental. We get there. I know this is a really big goal. And sometimes when people hear it, they think like, oh, that's for her. It's not for me. Why not? There's like, why not? And
Yeah.
that's the
Why not?
question, because why are we so easily convincing ourselves that it's not possible? Like, what if it was? My whole life has been that, what if it could happen? And it
Yeah.
did, and it is, and it will.
Yeah. I find that even from working in corporate marketing for over a decade, like no is just a start of a negotiation. Like
Exactly.
no is not actually an answer. No is just like, okay, well, maybe not under these circumstances, but what else can you do?
Yeah.
Right. But I feel like most people don't even, especially in business, I feel like that is a trait in business that like you need to know how to have is like negotiation, and then the resilience of being like, don't just take no at face value, like go back and see what else they have to offer.
You know, hard truth is if you hear no and you stop, you probably don't want it as bad as you think you do.
Mm, mic drop moment.
So
That's
like
true.
if a no is enough to make you stop going for your dream, you probably don't want it as bad as you want it, because there's always someone else to follow up with. There's always another question to ask. There's always another thing you can do to propel yourself to a version of the dream or the outcome or the goal. And so you got to keep swinging. You got to keep going. And it's okay if it's actually something you don't want, but just be
Hmm.
honest with yourself about it then,
Yeah.
instead of letting that show you that failure is actually in the cards for you. No, follow up isn't in the cards for you because maybe you don't actually want the thing.
Yeah, very, very true. While you've had all these major successes, something that I feel like not a lot of people also talk about is navigating super high highs in business while also navigating simultaneously very low lows. For example, you had said that the same week you were listed on Oprah's Super Soul 100, you were also diagnosed with cancer. And so it's this balance of like, oh my God, I'm having this life changing opportunity, but at the same time, my like life is in danger.
Mhm.
So how do you, and this has happened to you a couple of times where you've experienced these like situations. So I would love if you could kind of um, go further into that and kind of your point of view on the navigation of those two
Mhm.
things at the same time.
Yeah, I will say that like one of my biggest frustrations with life is that I I shared a little bit of context around my child, but like I wasn't allowed to have a childhood. My adolescence wasn't really allowed. My teen years were also very like trauma filled. And then also were my 20s. So I just have this like chip on my shoulder about like, come on. Like it could have
Yeah.
just been nice to have a pocket of like the age that I was
Yes.
actually in. That being said, it is like now that I've vented, now that I've said that side of it, now I will go into my wise woman self
Okay.
and and say that what I've learned out of all of this, and I'm coming through like Q1 this year was like a massive personal, like bottom out, and then professional, like steady, but then also like big wins, is like whether like whatever these highs and lows of the roller coaster entail, you have to find what your steady through line is.
Mm,
Even if it's the best thing that could ever happen to you. Like, I went to the state dinner with President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau and some incredible humans last Friday.
yep.
And then I'm back like doing regular workload shit. And, it's like my dopamine hits in my brain. It's like I need
Yep.
to give myself time to regulate. But if I stay steady, if I enable myself to appreciate the highs, but not get stuck in them and expect that to be life all the time, or you resent the lows of like, the worst, darkest things from childhood coming to light and rocking your world, or health challenges and scares, or death of people or animals that we love, and the really hard things that we navigate and go through. If we find what are the things that are my safety net that are going to ensure that I can survive most anything, um, and focus on those things at any point in the journey, like that can be your health, that can be your community, that can be the daily things you do for yourself, that can be your work supports, that can be just your mental resiliency to say, I am not the things that are happening to me. I'm the person who's like, I am a person experiencing these things and I can keep myself steady. It's like finding that middle ground, finding what allowed me to stay steady through the highs and lows is what has enabled me to like make it this far in life. Because the number of things that I've been through are remarkable, which they are for so many people too. And this is what we also need to remember is the pandemic was a great equalizer in showing us all that we are living through a collective trauma, where we can look at any person in the world now and say, without a doubt, you've been through something. And on top of that, we already know that every person is walking. You don't know what they've been through. I think there's like a Plato quote around something like that. And it gives you like perspective, and it can humble you to know that like we're all walking through something, but to also not discredit what you've been through. But that through line, that steadiness, and allowing yourself to ride the waves of grief, of pain, of my anger that I needed to vent about before I went into this spiel. Um, but the resiliency is coming back. The definition of resilience is how quickly you bounce back from adversity. But it's like, what surface are you bouncing off of? That's what I teach in my programs, is like what makes a person really resilient, and what is enabling that trampoline that you're bouncing off of. What is it made of? It's made of your health habits. It's made of your community, your relationship to work, your belief in yourself, and so many other things. But this is my spiel on this, is like your resiliency is what matters most, and staying steady through the storm. And like, what are the anchors that are going to help you stay steady through the storm?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times, especially maybe newer entrepreneurs, they have this sense of like, what did I do to attract this conflict into my business or my life? And then my point of view is like, if you think there's never going to be conflict in your business, if you think there's going to be like a day where you don't have some kind of problem in your business, like that's just delusional, and not delusional in like a good way. Like I can interview Oprah or Michelle Obama, like delusional in a way that's really going to lead to resentment. Because we all know that there's always going to be problems in life, and there also will always be problems in business, but like it's finding that through line. And even in my personal experience, one of my like biggest highs of Q1 was I led a international retreat for the first time for my mastermind in Mexico, and that was incredible. And when I was there, I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe I'm doing this. Like never in a million years is like, I'm going to take like 10 women to Mexico and I'm going to get paid to do that. Right. But at the same time, the very same week when I was in Mexico, also my dog was very sick and passing away. And it's like, what was I going to do in that moment? Like, was I going to like go back to New York City and be like, sorry guys, retreat is over? Like, no, like I had a responsibility to my clients to lead this retreat with 100%. But then I also had the responsibility as a mother to my soul dog, who was in the hospital. And thankfully my mother could, take care of him. But it's like I was being pulled at two different angles. And there was a part of me that was definitely resentful, because I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. I can't believe like the one time where I'm doing something so exceptional, I also have to go through this like life altering event back home. Like, but then at the same time, I was like, I'm not going to let this be like a thief of joy. Yes,
Mhm.
this is an incredibly awful situation that's going on, but realistically, there's nothing I can do besides talk to the doctors through the phone. So
Mhm.
when I wasn't talking through the doctors, I still want to give 100% and I still want to enjoy every single minute of this because I deserve it. I deserve to be, this is my seat and I will be damned if somebody's going to take it from me. The universe, life, like it's not taking it away from me. But I think that like that was such a good lesson for me of like compartmentalizing
Mhm.
and really like being in the present moment while also dealing with, you know, something that was life altering.
Mhm.
So
I'll add on there as well that, the day I interviewed Michelle Obama was the same day I had the biggest market loss of my portfolio, which at the time was the largest it had ever been, the greatest drop in one day. Um, and I had to take the stage. And so the compartmentalization is a huge part of resiliency and just being able to support your brain in processing and needing
yeah,
to do what it can do to perform and show up. Or in that instance, to like be very rational about the thing that's happening in front of you. The other thing that we get to remind ourselves is like, yes to all of men, like living a great life, being in abundance, all of this, but what makes me the person who's not going to have both of these things happen at the same time? Like again, cancer diagnosis and Oprah in the same
yeah,
week. This big market loss interviewing Michelle Obama, a massive like life-changing revelation in my family, and then these other highs that are happening. If I surrender the belief that bad things aren't supposed to happen to me when good things are happening, but that I can actually endure and manage both simultaneously, then we can let the joy actually help us ride what's the hardest thing in our life that we might be facing, that without the
yeah,
high may actually make it even worse for us.
yeah,
And that sometimes it happens that way for a reason. And I hate when people would say this to me about cancer or whatever. Everything happens for a reason. I'm not being that person.
yeah,
But in hindsight, I can look back and say, had that bottom out on the market happened without being on stage with Michelle Obama that day, maybe my depression the bottom would have been so much worse. Maybe I wouldn't have survived certain things if they didn't happen in tandem. So we never know the reasoning, but if we surrender this belief that we know the best way for things to unfold and then ride the wave in flow and in trying our best to do our best in a situation and with as much moving out of resistance as possible, um, it can actually sustain us better through those highs and lows in life.
yeah. And I think as a human being, 100%, but especially as an entrepreneur, I think that's the biggest distinction I see but besides, or instead of, um, your typical entrepreneur and actually stepping into a CEO. Because
Mhm.
when I think about the leaders I've had in corporate, the ones that truly stand out to me that I admire deeply are the ones that have that balance of masculine and feminine, where they're like, okay, I got to do what I got to do. I got to push through this. There's nothing I can do in this moment when I have this high and this low. But at the same time, I'm also surrendering to I may not know what is the best outcome in this moment and I'm going to just ride the wave. So it's that balance of the masculine action taking and then the feminine just like releasing and surrendering to the situation that I feel that the greatest leaders of companies actually possess within them.
Absolutely. 100%. I agree.
Yeah. Well, Kamal, is there anything that you want to say to our listeners? Any offers that you have to promote? How can somebody reach out to you and work with you?
Absolutely. So I run the Thought Leadership Intensive, which is a group coaching mastermind for a year. You can enroll at any time. It's rolling enrollment, where we build your thought leadership in the world and help you have the platform that you've been, I know, dying to have for a long time. And you get to work directly with me with all of the wonderful things I shared about my career, and build not only your resiliency, but also your public brand, your revenue generation, and your platform for the world to know your name. So if you want to learn more about that, you can shoot me a DM on Instagram at Komal Minhas, which you will see my name in the title of this podcast, or visit komal.com, KOMAL.com. And I'm actually coming back with my podcast very soon called Women Who Raise. It will be releasing in June. So stay tuned for that. I cannot wait to be talking to you more regularly in your ears next to you listening to Anna's podcast as well.
Amazing.